everything. So Stephanie, take it away. Tell us what we're doing here today. And thank you again for doing this, for everybody getting together for this. It's gonna be great.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Chang. I'm with Maker Ed, and we have a fantastic group of folks together today to discuss and chat about our experiences and thoughts around kits, making, and tinkering. A lot of this conversation has been ongoing for a really long time, but also really rose up on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and we figured there were so much fun things to say and to think through that we wanted to really have an opportunity to do so in real life, or as in real life as possible. So that's why we're here today. So I'm just gonna go around and let everyone introduce themselves, their name, their role, their organization, and how they find themselves in this conversation. Why don't we start with Amos?
Sure. Hi, I'm Amos Blanton. I work at the LEGO Foundation on a project called the LEGO Idea Studio. And it's a place where we develop open-ended activities to invite kids to experience what's called the LEGO idea, which in a nutshell is essentially the ability to create something new using LEGO bricks that's interesting or meaningful to them. LEGO Foundation's goal is to redefine play and reimagine learning. And so we're sort of a part of that greater project and involved in all of those aspects. And I got into this, I think, because I tweeted out the first tweet that sort of was the parental tweet, I guess you'd say, of the conversation that it really kicked off, which was actually, I think, the most interesting tweet ever. Not because of the tweet, but because of the conversation that somehow it led to. So excited to be here and talking with you guys about this. Thanks,
Amos. Why don't you pass it off to someone else?
Okay, I think Bud is next on the list that I've got on my screen.
Yay, the alphabet. B's
Yes.
full of A's, right? My name is Bud Hunt. I'm an instructional technologist and teacher with roots in the Clearview Library District out in Windsor, Colorado. I have a big head, so I wear a lot of hats. I also do a lot of instructional coaching and work with teachers around the country around issues of technology and education. And at the library, I'm interested in conversations like this one because we circulate kits. So we're always looking to try to figure out what can we put in a box that's a fun, iterative experience that folks can take home and discover new worlds with, and then maybe bring it back to the library and figure out ways to play with it.
But pass it on.
Colleen's a C.
All right, I'm next in the alphabet. Hi, I'm Colleen Graves, and I've been a public educator for the last 15 years, and I recently joined Makey Makey, aka Joy Labs. We have a deal with, we can't decide which name, as their content creator. And my main goal in that job is to create content that helps people, teachers, students, to create awesome stuff with Makey Makey. And I try to make my materials for teachers as open-ended as possible. And I've been writing books with my husband about the same thing for the last 3 years. So I've written a couple books where we wrote projects, and our main goal is to get kids playing and tinkering and starting out somewhere, giving them somewhere to start, and then seeing where they bloom and blossom beyond that. And the next is Katie, because that's
great. Thanks, Colleen. My name is Katie Henry. I'm the Professional Development Manager for BirdBrain Technologies. We have two products, the Finch Robot and the Hummingbird Robotics Kit. And my role is really to work with schools who want to integrate robotics into the everyday classroom cross-curricularly, so not traditional STEM subjects. How do you put robots in a poetry class and still meet instructional goals? Those are the kinds of problems that I like to help solve, and I get to do that with schools all over the world. So I think one of the other questions was, how did I get into this conversation? And Colleen actually tagged me in this Twitter conversation and sucked me right in. So thank you, Colleen. Okay, let's see, Peter.
All right, I'm Peter Howe. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I do a lot of informal ed stuff. I spent 6 years teaching in the classroom, and then I've been working at the Science Museum in Minnesota for most of the last 20 some years, and also do some of library programs on my own and other kind of after school type things. I've been using a lot of Lego in the museum work, and I've always had that tension of going from, here are instructions, I want to throw away the instructions. So how do I use the instructions? It is an important part to me. I also work on at the museum. I'm part of a fairly large team, and we're always trying to hammer out consistent language for all of us so that we can advocate for what we're doing, talk to other people, explain, how do you say what we're doing in a nutshell, that kind of thing. So that's why I come into it thinking some of the language is important. And off to Stephanie.
Oh, I'm going to pass for a second. I'll come back to me. Karen, why don't you go? Thanks, Peter.
Sure. I'm Kerry Wilkinson, the director of the Tinkering Studio at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. And I think I got drawn into this conversation, if I can remember. Somebody used the word open-ended, and I had just gone to the CLS conference, the Connected Learning Summit out in Boston. And to describe it mildly, or maybe less mildly, I felt like open-endedness was a little bit under attack. In 3 different sessions I had attended, people were really questioning the value of open-endedness in lessons and in kits. One was kind of comparing the Arduino kit from Make to other types of things, and really valuing more instructional and assembly-based or scaffolded experiences rather than open-ended, maybe saying you had to start there, then to be able to get to tinker and explore. And I don't know, it didn't sit right with me. It's not that I'm in favor of just kind of throwing lots of stuff out there and saying, do whatever you want, but I was curious, and then stumbled upon this conversation and felt like, oh yeah, this is great. This is exactly what we're thinking about, and wanting to consider, what are the kits that are out there, or things that are more suggestive. I think it was Peter actually used the word possibilities. And to me, that's what I'm really looking for, a kit of possibilities, not specific outcomes.
Hey, I forgot to say why I joined the conversation. Should I add it?
Sure.
I replied to Amos's tweet, and I think I started the brawl of everything else. And my tweet to Amos was basically talking about invention fluency and invention literacy, and how we have to get kids making all the time and creating all the time, and we have to be doing it too. Because somehow in Amos's tweet, it was about kids doing things, riding bikes and all these things. And I thought, yes, that's true. And we need to model how we make stuff and how we fail and how we do things too. And then it just then it spiraled out of control. And here we are.
Thanks, Colleen. Mark, do you want to say hi as well?
Oh, sure. I had a Zoom account, so that's how I'm here. No. So I run a company called Design Case, where I do curriculum consulting in Maker Ed space, hands-on learning and around the world for companies and schools. But also in the summer, we do Year in the Making, which is our little summer PD. And so I have my studio set up for that. So yes, welcome.
Thanks, everyone. And again, I'm Stephanie Chang. I work with Maker Ed, and we do a lot of work supporting educators in a wide variety of contexts around professional development and a community of support. So I think you see that there's a lot of different experiences and contexts represented here, but I think overall we are all doing something in relation to designing learning experiences or supporting them, and thinking about what sort of tools, scaffolds, open-ended prompts, language, all of the above are really important for ensuring that we're reaching the learning outcomes that we really want to be reaching for ourselves, for the students, for the teachers that we work with. So I'd be really curious to hear from anyone just how you've used kits or developed kits in your work, and what those thoughts really look like.
All right, I'll chime in. I oftentimes have a 5 days, a week to work with kids, 3 hours a day. And in that time, I want to get them to making something that they have imagined, that comes out of them. But I also need to make sure that by Thursday, they know how to put these parts together so that they have the flexibility to do something that they imagine. I've talked a bit about how there's almost like a vocabulary for how, or a grammar for how these parts fit together. And I think a really good set or a good kit has parts that all work together, but they don't necessarily make sense to somebody who's coming at it for the first time. Now, children's blocks, you get unit blocks, everybody knows how, how to build with those. But when you get something that's more complicated like Lego Technic, it's unless kids are comfortable, they're not going to design something of their own. So how do I get them to that point in 3 days is my challenge.
Yeah, and similarly, one of the things that we're talking about a lot over here in the Lego Idea Studio is how do we kind of do some interesting provocations in between two spaces that everybody knows. One is like the building this set for the instructions, just do exactly what each page says, and then you sort of build it, and then you're done. And the other one is just, here's a pile of bricks, do exactly whatever you want. And I kind of think that while both of those have their place and their value, that really the most interesting stuff that I'm interested in kind of exploring is what happens kind of in between. So when there's some level of constraint that children are given a provocation, for example, art machines is something developed with the Tinkering Studio, where we invite kids to make a machine out of Lego and motors that will draw an image. So they have a job to do. But of course, within that constraint, there really are infinite possibilities, right? So there's never going to be, they're never going to run out of possible different kinds of patterns to draw with their art machines. And so that's like one example that we often use when we're talking about this really interesting fertile area in between doing something step by step to come to a fixed end created by the designer. And starting from just totally open and free, there's a lot of interesting magic that happens in between. So really, I think of our work as designers of experiences is, well, how do we design this experience to guide people to sort of know where they are as a starting place, and then kind of branch out into something that really is led by themselves, where, to use a term that Reggio Emilia uses, who we've been collaborating with a lot lately, to invite the child to be the protagonist in their own learning experience.
Kind of, maybe I can try to connect Amos and Colleen's statement. I mean, I think this idea of inventing, I mean, there's this lovely quote from Seymour Papert about the role of the teacher being to create the conditions for invention. And I would love it if that's what kits could be more of. But I mean, I also realize that the challenge is for commercial kits, you've got them sitting on a store shelf. They've got to be appealing. People have to know what they're going to get out of it. So it's kind of a weird conundrum. Like, how do you have a kit that's like, well, I don't know what this is going to end up like. It could be this or this or this. but I think if we're really doing a service to learners, whether they're kids or adults, to really be able to do what Amos is saying and having their ideas come out of the materials that you're working with. I mean, I think that's a goal. Stephanie asked for an example of kits, and I'll give this one maybe as a provocation. We have these tiny little kits that we put in a vending machine in the Tinkering Studio. Their main purpose is for people to have had an experience with the Tinkering Studio. Maybe it's sewn circuits or a paper circuit or something like that. And they can just get some parts. Some of them are a little more kit-like, maybe 4 or 5 parts in a little box. But it's just enough to pique your interest in an experience. And then the kit allows you to go somewhere else afterwards. But I don't know. I mean, that doesn't seem like a marketable, a very good idea and widely marketable. You know, it works in the Tinkering Studio proper, but probably not on a store shelf.
I guess I want to hop in on that because I hear a lot of words, and I want to add one in, and I guess I want to add the word invitation, right? A good kit is an invitation to discovery. And so Amos was talking about this sort of follow the instructions or do whatever you want. And I love going to the Lego store and deciding, is today a pick a brick day, or is today it's a lightsaber day, or lately it's a Hogwarts day. Not that I have a Lego problem, but I have children and it's their problem, it's their issue. But as a school guy who's now in libraries and who's worked with libraries when I was in schools, there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of fence looking in both places to say, ooh, look at what you can do in that other space. And when I came into the library, it was really interesting for us to think about what we could send out of the library that would create an invitation for somebody to wonder about something. So invention isn't necessarily the goal for us. Sometimes it is, but usually it's, hey, here's this thing you don't know anything about. Is there an experience I can help you have? I can provoke, I can start that invites you into wondering about some new stuff in a new way. And what are I guess a big question for me in conversations like this one are, what are the things that lead to an invitation that moves beyond the kit and into a world of discovery and wonder?
Okay, I'm piggybacking off Bud because I've been wanting to say something. Kits, the word kit is like part of what we talked about, but the Makey Makey kit specifically totally changed my life. And I've been saying that to people and they laughed at me for a little bit about that. But it's allowed me to see that the world is completely reformable and that I can change things and that I can make stuff out of like everyday things. And that's really like been the thing that's changed who I am, like as an educator, because I started tinkering with Arduino first, and it was 4 or 5 years ago, and I was so lost and I couldn't figure out where to put the semicolons and I didn't understand like what was going on. And then a few weeks later, I played my first banana piano, and it was history from there. Like I started looking at this weird little thing and how can I do things? And for some reason, when I play with it, I can see all the other things I can do, but a lot of people don't see that. They still see like a banana piano. That's all I can do. So my goal from when I was working with kids and the Makey Makey was how can we use this to do other things, like whatever you want. So we started doing an invention literacy project, which was again inspired by Jay and his concept of invention literacy and how the world works. So inventing is sort of like writing, like we have to do it a lot. We have to invent a lot. It doesn't mean I'm actually inventing something anyone else wants or needs. It just means that I'm actually seeing how the world works so I can understand it, so I can change it, which I think is a really powerful thing to hand like a 9 to 100-year-old person, right? You can actually change the world by doing these things. And no, it's not like groundbreaking changing the world, but it did change like me. And the other thing that I talked about with Jay, when I interviewed him for a book I was writing at the same time I actually interviewed Amos, was the idea of like open beginning, middle, and end projects. And I think that some of you are hitting on that already. Like everything seems open-ended, but what if it's open-middled? And I did actually go and look at Jay's doctoral thesis today, Mark. You laugh at me, but I went and looked back because he talks about like any kit can be open, beginning, middle, or end. And it just has to, you can open any part of a kit, like you can just change it. So maybe you give your kids a painting kit, but you don't give them any paint. What are they going to paint with? Right. And that's like, to me, the really cool part of thinking about a kit and doing other things. If you do other stuff with it, like that's why I like Makey Makey, because the middle thing can be anything. It doesn't have to be bananas. And also it doesn't have to play a piano. It can be whatever I want. So it's kind of just changed the way that I view things and the way that I look at things. Like last week, someone was like, oh, look at this weird bathroom thing where I press a smiley face and it takes track of like how many people think the bathroom is clean here at the Toronto airport. And someone said, oh, that'd be cool if we did this in class for exit tickets. And I used to do exit tickets as a teacher. And I never thought of making one with Makey Makey until that moment. And then I thought, oh, how can I do that? Well, it's really easy. I'll just build a switch and code it in Scratch, and then boom, like there I've made something. It was actually the first time I made something practical. So now I think Katie would go.
Yeah, no, I'm just loving listening. I'm going to jump out and be in the audience. This is great. So a couple of things are really standing out to me right now. Karen and Colleen, you both, Karen, you were talking about marketing and how do we talk about this kit or these tools that we're trying to put into the hands of others who aren't where we are when we use the tool. And so you kind of have two ends of this. The person who's going to implement the kit and then the receiver kind of the kit. And that's an oversimplification just to make the following point, which is the modularity that Colleen's talking about. So she's talking about these chunks of how do we scaffold in, how do we have this open-ended application or experience or purpose driven by students, driven by content standards, which not an evil word totally, there are ways to make it work. And then this final so-called output or thing, which may lead to something else. And so Karen, when you talk about that marketing thing, what's really, I made the diffusion of innovation, that bell curve that sort of represents where our early adopters and our innovators are. These are our hackers, our rogue anarchists, they're makers, they're people, they give them a tub of scraps and they're going to create something amazing. That's not most educators, not most educators. That's a good chunk of them, but not most of them. And so when you're working with most educators, fundamentally, they're hardwired to want something different. And yet the thing that makes making so compelling is the debugging, the divergent thinking, the creative problem solving. That's the mindset that we're trying to imbue with these kits. And yet that majority population is typically, they buy into something when all the fear is taken out, when all the risk is taken out. You told me how it will work and where this will go, I'm in. And historically, in the diffusion of innovation, marketing to that population involves saying, here's what you're gonna get, here's how it's gonna work, and if it doesn't work, here's the number you call and we're gonna replace it for free. And so the question and the challenge, I think, with a kit is, how do you sell the mindset of debugging and troubleshooting as the thing, as the mindset, to people who have historically been scared to death of that?
Well, I think this sort of relates. Aaron and Amber both asked some questions. Aaron's question was saying, like, I'm in a library space, I'm wanting to create a maker station with kits, and what materials should I use? I feel like the materials that suggest that debugging that you're talking about, that's a sort of an innate part of what happens as a result, those are great places to start, or materials that suggest multiple possibilities. I mean, it's kind of interesting to think about Amber's point too, in that the open, she's asking, like, the open-endedness is fearful, exactly kind of what you're saying about teachers too, Katie. I mean, I think somehow we have to get people comfortable with knowing that they're going to be a little bit thrown off. Debugging is going to be a part of it, you know, figuring your way through as a way in, rather than, we have this funny tendency, I'm going to include myself in this, to front load a teaching experience with information, tell you all the things that you're going to do, and then you go and do it. And I feel like we need to flip that on its end. And it can be uncomfortable, but let's figure out ways through the language that we use in the descriptors to make that discomfort feel a little bit more natural and an expected part of the process. When Amos talked about that space between, like, totally guiding by instruction and totally open, I think you can do that. It's this sweet spot, you know, as we call it, this constraint that's open enough, that not too open, like open enough that you get a toehold, but it also is indicative of, like, hey, I've got a better idea than what's being suggested here, right? So it's open and suggestive, but really for me, it all boils down to what happens at the end. If everybody is building the same thing, it's not open-ended. It might be a cool kit, but it's not open-ended.
So when you say what you said about debugging, really makes me want to add the for me personally, like, debugging is where I learned what I did and what happens and how things actually work. That's where I actually become, like, fluent in how an invention works, is when I'm debugging the process. And I think because Bud and I are also, we met at the National Writing Project, I always like to talk with teachers with the languages. This is the same as revision. Right? It's the same as a revision step, which is a pain to do with kids. It's so hard to get kids to revise papers, but when they actually, and grown-ups, but when they actually do it and they see, oh, well, this is how my writing can be better. And so if you actually debug a real problem that you've created when you're making something, then you go, oh, yes. And actually just yesterday, I went to my daughter's school, and they had tried to do paper circuits last year. And they had said, well, we taught the kids circuits, and then so we thought we could just have them make paper circuits in art and everything was going to be fine. And I walked in and the classroom was chaos, right? And no one could get anything to work. And are my supplies faulty? So then I showed her how to make a paper circuit, a simple paper circuit. And I showed her how it could not work. And I just showed all the things that could go wrong. And she was like, oh, there's just so many pieces that could go wrong. And I was like, yeah, this is why I love paper circuits, because you have to tinker when they don't work to get them to work. And then you actually realize how a circuit works from building that paper circuit when you have problems. Like, if you don't have any problems, you're going to go home and all of a sudden your light's not going to work. You're not going to know how to get it back on because you don't have that facilitator anymore who can keep pushing you and edging you to go to the right place. So
I'm glad you mentioned revision, because I was thinking that too. And I guess one thing I'd throw in is that while debugging and revision are, like, essential skills in a lot of things, they're not always the skill that I want an experience to teach, right? So one of the things that I think we want to do when we're thinking about the universe that we're going to provide to somebody in a kit is to figure out what stuff we want to be questionable or in play or exploratory, and what stuff we want to give as given. Because I think particularly in new domains for kids and grownups, like if you say, man, you could learn anything, that's paralyzing, right? And I don't know that it's fair to somebody to say, every time you approach a new experience, you have to be prepared that the experience is going to go wrong. So I hope that when we're building spaces and invitations, we're thinking about what are the skills or experiences we want to come out of this, and what are the ones that we know this isn't for, so that we can at least frame the experience as in, here are 3 things that might go wrong, but you don't have to know that anything could go wrong, or this isn't really about a debugging experience or a revision experience. This might be about a generative idea starting experience, or just a figuring out, if you think about Tetris as a game, like, oh, there's only so many ways these pieces can go together, and there's only so many pieces. And today my goal is to learn that the L shape this way and the L shape that way are different, right? So thinking about what you want to come out of that kit can oftentimes be a really important thing, at least in terms of fairness to the learner, so that they don't have to bring so much pre-knowledge to the experience that they're not actually prepared to have an experience.
Yeah, and providing guardrails like is really, just boundaries that they can work within is a great idea.
I think what I'm hearing is that there's this continuum that we're all acknowledging and really trying to find our place within. And so the goals in which we're trying to really aim towards are things like piquing your interest and creating conditions for learning and discovery, and inviting opportunities to explore materials in different ways with more open-ended and multiple possibilities than what we might see right in front of us typically. And definitely those opportunities for problem solving and mistake making and debugging. I think that, for better or for worse, is probably on one end of the continuum, and there's a lot of that spectrum that we also really need to acknowledge. And I think a lot of our commenters who are watching are also acknowledging and asking about, where there are also content-related items, other sorts of skills. There's time constraints that we all need to take into consideration, whether we're designing an activity or designing a kit. So I'm curious if you guys can think about or discuss what are those things that we need to consider when we're creating a kit or when we're creating an experience that really allow for any entry point or aiming towards that open-ended, piquing your interest discovery point, but knowing that people need to enter in different ways.
So let me follow up just with something that Jay Silver said again. He's getting brought into this conversation. He's a good friend of mine, and he's really inspired me in the way that he thinks about these things. Is that he has a really sort of simple saying that I think came up around describing one of the first Scratch workshops that we were running together. He said that it's important to be open-ended, but it's okay to be closed-started, right? And by this he means that when somebody's coming into an experience, rather than overwhelm them with this infinite number of possibilities, challenges, things to debug, you can really kind of have the constraint start out really, really tight. Okay, you just have this simple job to do. Maybe it's not even open-ended at all. Just connect this wire or insert tab A into slot B or whatever it is. But you should be using that as a designer to kind of build the confidence that you need to sort of open up that constraint slowly as you go along, so that more and more freedom emerges. And that freedom should be following their level of confidence, which you hope is growing as they're kind of developing that process or that freedom. And I think that's a really great way of kind of managing or scaffolding people's anxiety, because there's a lot of anxiety when you're asked to just, I'm just supposed to do whatever I want. And it kind of helps ease them into it in some ways. So that I think is a really useful metaphor for thinking about these dimensions of complexity and how to sort of make sure that it comes at them at a level or a rate that they can cope with.
Yeah, and I think that makes it more accessible too. Like, not everyone can just go and start making whatever because they aren't Jay Silver, right? They need something to kind of guide them.
I feel like,
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there are questions about the constraints of school and the structure that people need, kids or adults. And I definitely see this, but I want us to ask ourselves a hard question, in that if we don't allow for some open-endedness, what are we giving up? Mitch Resnick has this lovely quote where he's talking about, for the future society, like, it's not really going to be about how much we know or what we know. So this is the content piece that some of you are bringing up. It's really going to be about how What's our ability to think and act creatively like? So my question for all of us is, what are the opportunities that we're giving kids a chance to practice and develop that ability? I think kids can do this. I don't think the majority of them do this. I'll just maybe end this with a curriculum from the 60s that is still my absolute favorite. And there were kits built around it, but it's called the Elementary Science Study, ESS. And it was phenomena based, but it was really a way of introducing an idea with lots of different experiences. So it was scaffolded. It was very scaffolded, but it allowed for that end result, that variation in what kids' projects would be. And to me, that's kind of the bellwether for this. It's got to have a personal connection that's personalized to the individual learner.
Absolutely. The only piece I was going to add is that I think it's fair to tell people many of the things that we're saying too, right? Like one of the things about discovery experiences that I think really suck for people, and get to some of the points and concerns that Katie raised earlier, is that a lot of times we expect people to discover that it's okay to be uncomfortable. Sometimes it's okay to say and to preface an experience with, hey, these are the places where you might be uncomfortable in this, and that's okay. And you may even give some examples or strategies, but a lot of times we want to hand a kid the mysteries of the universe without a frame for like beginning to process what might actually happen. And that's different than saying, here's all the things that could go wrong, but at least saying, hey, this could go weird. Here are some things that might happen, and here's some things to think about as you go. And that's reassuring for grownups too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've been leading workshops for teachers, and sometimes when I bring out a Makey Makey for librarians, they just shut down on me. And this summer I did a workshop with actually microbit, Makey Makey, and Hummingbird controllers, and I handed them all to the teachers, and I was like, are you nervous right now? And they all looked like they were about to cry. And I said, I'm nervous right now too. Like, this is hard and it might be difficult, but you can do it. Can we all just like try? And it was the best, microcontroller workshop I've ever led, because we all like introduced the fear and acknowledged it and knew that it was going to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to link back to something Peter said at the very beginning. Peter, you said, use the phrase flexibility to do what they imagine. And you talked about this like exploratory period, but like by Wednesday or Thursday, something needed to be anchored and done in improving a skill of some kind. And then you followed that up with, that would give them the flexibility to do what they imagined. And I was wondering if you could say more about what that meant.
Sure. I don't know. Am I on?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I'm new to this kind of thing. I feel sometimes like the old man. Yeah, I want the kids need to have a sense of what possibilities are there. What can they do with this material? And how much of their own idea can actually come into this. So sometimes I don't want them to have an idea that is beyond the capability of this system we're working, this set. You're not going to use a 9636 you're not going to use that Lego set and make a rocket that actually flies. Okay. So having that initial experience helps kids figure out, what are the possibilities? What's the range that I can get with this thing? But I do want them to push a little further by the end of the week to, marry that or combine that with what they're interested in, and, what are the skills that they've picked up, so that now they're ready. And ideally, there's only a few times where a kid comes to me and says, I'm trying to make this work and I can't quite figure that out. And I say, okay, maybe you could use a bevel gear here, or, but my nudges should be very slight. I shouldn't have to come in, and I really hate having to come in and tell a kid, we can't make a plane. You can't make a car that whatever. I don't want them to aim too high, and at least until they're grounded in a certain, and I like that what Amos said about their freedom follows or builds as their confidence builds. And so I think that was a really important idea. Does that help?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I think that flexibility to do what they imagine is a really important goal, because you don't want there to be the flexibility to panic with 100,000 choices. You want there to be the flexibility to do what I imagine. And Bud, I think, wrote recently about knowing where the decision points are. And I think back to when I was a classroom teacher, and I would have these kits essentially that I made for my classroom. I was a 4th grade classroom teacher, and we had 4 standardized tests actually at the end of the year, 1 in each subject area. And it was a public school in Southwestern Ohio. And there was a lot to do. And you know, what I would do to sort of unpack my content standards and sort of go at it from like a play-based, open-ended way is I would ask myself, for example, in the study of light, we had to look at the ways light bounced and it moved. And I asked myself, when is light a problem in the life of my students? And I thought, this is actually a really good question I should ask them. When is light a problem in your life? And we began to problematize this content standard and all the ways light could be a problem. And through that conversation, we began to see problems with light that needed to be solved. So what that did for me in terms of making a kit is it allowed me to say, we need some things that reflect, we need some things that absorb, and we need some things that transmit. And oh yeah, those are 3 vocabulary words that really matter and help us talk about the way light moves. And so that framing of the question, you know, when is blank a problem in your life? When are decimals? And you know, you can make it pretty benign with students and they will start cranking it out. When is area a problem in your, I'm going to paint my bedroom. I would like a new carpet. You know, I need more space for my things. You just pose the question back to them. When is blank a problem in your life? And they will diverge and converge, and you will then emerge with, well, that actually diverge, converge, and emerge. I like that. I just made that up. I'm going to write that down. You will come out of that conversation with 2 important things. 1, students' buy-in into the learning journey you're about to go on. And 2, probably some really good ideas for how you might create an open-ended kit of resources to support the thing that you're about to go into. And maybe some other things as well.
Feels like that'd be a good lens
Sure.
for kids who are about to take up stuff too, right? If I'm thinking about a problem before I'm playing with pieces, then I'm going to go and approach the pieces with something to get done rather than just, what's a piece? What's this thing do? What's that about? So that's my new favorite question. When is light a problem in your life? I like it a lot.
You know, I have a question to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, Katie. You know, when there's these easily accessible tools that works, or even things that but you know, I grew up in Alaska, and we didn't have a lot of things, so we made things, right? My dad, when I say we, is my dad, right? He'd take a deuce and a half and put DC-9 tires on it, make a swamp buggy out of it. And so I got to grow up seeing that, but I knew that I didn't know enough to get into that. So my question with kits, and you know, Colleen, you talked about Makey Makey and Lego, and there's a lot of things that are really easy. I'm just going to play devil's advocate here a little bit, that are really easy to get into and have success in. And we need students to have success. So 2 questions: what defines success, and how do we have kids get success in making constructivism hands-on stuff? And the second thing is, what if we're trying to get them to have success in something that's not just the banana piano, or you know, hummingbird kits or Legos, where they can just kind of explore and tinker and feel success?
I heard you say my name at the beginning of that. I'm happy to start the answer, but it's going to take all of us. So I truly think this comes down to 2 things: criteria and constraints. And your question about what are your criteria for success starts with, what are your goals? And if my goals are to provide the most open-ended experience on the planet, where I'm going to have 27 students with 27 divergent projects, that sounds like a very open-ended goal, and it's totally doable insofar as I can provide all the space, time, resources, and things in that to those kids. And so criteria for success are linked to the criteria of my goals. Where am I actually going with this? And so what success can look like at some level has to do with the goals of what I set out to do. Can I allow space for surprises? Can I allow space for mystery? Can I create conditions for mystery? Yes. And that's a different tangential conversation. So criteria and constraints, have clear goals and have an idea of what you might hope it will look like when the thing you want to happen is happening.
So I'm going to piggyback off Katie, because I noticed a lot of people in the chat too are saying, but how do I do this? How do I go from kits to totally open-ended and kids making whatever they want, which seems to be sort of your question too. So I've been doing this thing in schools for a few years and trying to figure out the answer myself, right? I've been trying, and I think the ideal school, what would start is in the beginning of the year, we would explore materials. We would explore cardboard. We would explore paper circuits. We would learn how to use Makey Makey and Hummingbird. We might spend a whole semester just immersed in materials and playing and seeing how things work. And then hopefully the students will have enough meaningful learning experiences from that they can go and create something bigger at the end. So I kept trying, in my schools with the Invention Literacy project, which was pretty much, you can make whatever you want with what we have here at school. And sometimes that turned out really cool. Like kids would go, oh, well, I want to make this thing, but I don't have Legos. And then I'd say, well, okay, we don't have Legos. What other materials can you use? And suddenly following a step-by-step guide became very open and very flexible because they didn't have Legos and they had to use a different material. So like inventive material use sometimes just pushes that same problem solving. But getting them to that point, it's going to take a lot of time, and you're going to have to be at that school for a while. Like you might be able to get that done in 1 year, but then think if once you've made so much cool stuff with cardboard, kids always gravitate towards cardboard because they've all made things with cardboard. So if you have that project of, hey, you can make whatever you want, they're all going to go make cardboard candy dispensers because they all love cardboard. And, so do I. So I don't blame them. But if we want them to branch out into other things, they're going to have that experience and that time with that material ahead of time. And I'm saying material, but I still mean like kits, tools, whatever. They have to learn how everything works before they're going to be able to go out and just make some other crazy thing. So allowing that time, that's the part that teachers have problems with because they don't have that time. Like they don't have time to give students that much time to play and tinker.
Well, I think that's part of the issue. And I think maybe the language that we use to describe things is another problem. I mean, I think totally open-ended is a total misnomer. I think I studied in grad school with Eleanor Duckworth, and I would describe that I had some of the most open-ended experiences of my life with her, but they were very structured. So I think that's the thing. It's like, but they were structured in a way to get at learners' ideas. That was the end goal, not I need to get my students to this place, but we're going to work in this territory. So that was defined. But how we get there, subtle shifts were made by educators along the way. And I think it's what can we do to set the constraints so that they are, as Amos described, they're narrow in the beginning, but they allow things to open up and really follow tangential paths. And I'm not saying this is easy, but I am suggesting that we lose something if we don't get there. And I think the idea, well, actually, earlier I ran over and grabbed this off of Mike's wall. This is a lovely quote that we just found just the other day. It's something that Edith Ackerman wrote down for us. And she's saying like nothing is harder and more important, by the way, to design environments for people to design in. I mean, that's the funny thing, right? It's how we get what selection of materials, no matter what the phenomena is. This could be poetry, this could be like some physical science stuff, this could be biological stuff. No matter what it is that you're working in, what's the play set that you're starting with? And you can even think, somebody mentioned Lego kits earlier. Like all Lego kits are not the same. Some are more suggestive of the final product. Some are a little bit more open to exploration and interpretation. I love the old ads of the 70s for Legos. They were even more open than that. But I mean, it's how we situate that learning experience, whether we're in a school, a classroom, or a kitchen table. If you would take just for a minute, indulge that all of those situations, there are designers behind that experience that we're offering, whatever that invitation is. And if we can structure it in a way that really allows for decisions to be made on the part of the learner in this case, and best case scenario, kind of the learners and the teachers to be switching back and forth. That's where technology can actually be really exciting, because that can really happen a lot. But I think it's more important that we talk about the qualities that we're aiming for than sort of the outcome or our end goals, and see how we can build those into the experiences that we offer.
I think that's a really strong point. And I think it's important to remember too, that kids and grownups don't come at us with no experiences, right? It's not like they're waiting to learn for the first time. Even kindergartners have 5 years of learning experience, right? And it's really important to start with not necessarily introducing them to new materials, but reminding them that they have material experience. They might know how to use words to make somebody feel good, or use their bodies to express something, or do whatever. And remembering that everybody's got some materials that they're working with anyway, really important. The second thing I want to say out loud again, because you said it, is that all learning experiences were designed by somebody. And if they're crappy experiences, then it was bad design. And frequently, I think as a grown-up, I do this. I'm certain that I've seen other people do it. It's somebody else's design that we've just adopted, and we're like, oh, it's not our fault, not our bad. We have this bad thing, so we're going to pretend that there's no agency left in us to do a thing. We can always make those shifts where we are. So there's a question in the chat about where do we find time for these things? I don't know. You got 90 minutes every other day. Where are you going to find the time? You've got, like I say, 90 minutes every other day. Play with your design, tinker a little bit.
I think a lot of what we've been talking about and some of the questions that have come up in chat and from our viewers, commenters, are also just how do we structure opportunities that provide a sense of possibility, but don't prescribe them? And I think we all have experiences with that. And so if we can chat about that, I think that would be really interesting, where values and qualities and processes and what we really care about might be emphasized more than the specific goal. So what sorts of opportunities have we structured as educators that provide a sense of those possibilities, but don't tell exactly, because we're all creating kits and experiences and designing opportunities back and forth. So what do those actually look like in a way that we hope that they look like?
Yeah, well, and it's tricky too. I mean, Mark in the chat just said something that I think is relevant. And it's this notion that there are times when we actually do need to prescribe, right? Like, hi, I'm your teacher. As an agent of the state of Colorado, I'm required to accomplish X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about what X, Y, and Z are. Let's talk about what X and Y are that you already know. I mean, Katie got to this more eloquently than I am right now. But also sometimes a learner comes to you and says, I don't know what to do next. Tell me what to do. And there's a moment to coach them. And then there's a moment to just say, try this. This is interesting. Here's a text, read it. Here's a story. Here's a thing, play with it for 10 minutes. Like, I think we have to be careful about when we exercise our prescriptive powers as educators, both informally and formally, but we have to remember that we have them, and sometimes our learners need them.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of what I did last year that I felt was really allowed for open-ended experiences, because you want specific examples, are things that I got from Karen at the Tinkering Studio, and designing, like what she said, is half-baked prototypes. So sometimes those are things where, like, I made a cardboard. How do you say the word, Karen? Is it automata? I can't say. You say what?
I say automata, but you can
okay.
say.
I said it right then. I'm not going to say it again because I'll say it bad. And I designed it bad, like I designed the actual thing, but whatever I put on top wasn't like very exciting. So the kids would like look at how to make the design and then make really interesting things. And so if you haven't seen it, it's just like you take cardboard and you use cams and you make a spinning, like an automated spinning thing. And kids made things that turned around, then they made dancing things. And then my other favorite, absolute favorite, completely open experience was using the wind tube and just telling kids after reading Rosie Revere Engineer, okay, build a flying thingamajig, whatever kind of flying thingamajig you want, out of paper and tape. That's all I'm going to give you. And just like giving them, so I did give them a very open, structured beginning, but no one's flying things really looked the same. Like they did not all end up with the same flying things. And then, of course, my last big thing was the Invention Literacy. And I literally did say the question posed, and I did have structure in each day, and it's on my blog if you want to look at it. But the question posed was, how does blank work? And can I make my own out of recyclables? And then they just did that. Like, and some of them were successful and some of them weren't. And I think that's really the hardest part. Someone else said in the chat, what we are about is process, maybe not necessarily the end outcome. And I agree 100%. And that's the hard part for some teachers. They can't get to that part where they're grading they want to grade the outcome. They don't want to grade the process. And so I think part of what makes that really not easy to grade, but something that you look at is documenting the process throughout, without going so overboard that they're over documenting the process and not having fun anymore, sort of like reading logs, right? We don't want to go there. But if they're documenting what they're doing as they're making, then they kind of see what they've done and learn from their mistakes in the same way. So it's about creating an experience that is going to end up with everyone having something that looks different.
I want to follow up on something Colleen said there about starting off with the half-baked prototype. I think this is really important, and one of the things that I've identified that's really significant to how I do my work. I can't show kids something that's so awesome that they go, oh, wow, that's really cool, and it's beyond what I can do, and it intimidates them. I want to show them something that works. It's sort of crappy. I want them to look at it and say, oh, I can do that, but I can make mine better. And I've done public programs where I've had a grown-up participate and make something that's really amazing. And if I leave that sample out, it shuts down the amount of creativity that the next group of kids making stuff isn't as creative, because they've seen that really awesome thing that some adult made. And so, as soon as that adult's gone, that's apart, because I don't want to intimidate the learners. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I want to get in here, and it goes back to a question that Aaron asked in the chat. What do you do when you're setting up how do you make a good kit? A good activity kit for going out and sending into libraries or whatever. I think that working out the provocation. Why do you want to do this? What's the something that creates the spark and the engagement is important. I think that the sample, which we just talked about, a crappy sample. Part of the sample is that the kids can see, oh, this part goes into there, or this is the way these things connect. And so they have a skill that they can practice. And maybe this is where instructions come in, that you identify a couple of skills that the kids need to build in order to have the confidence to do other things with this set. And when it comes to material options, I think one of the things I've learned is that there's a real difference between quantity and diversity is not the right word, but the number of different kinds. So I can have a lot more creativity come out of kids if I give them 1,000 popsicle sticks. There's nothing you can do that you're going to run out of popsicle sticks. But if I gave them 10 each of 100 different materials, I'm not going to get as creative response from the kids. So lots of material, lots of few different kinds of materials, but lots of quantity of each one.
That reminds me of design challenges I've done where we were sort of given a budget and we had to purchase the material that we put into the design challenge. And one of them, we had to create a prototype of a leg. So it was like a prosthetic that would bear 117 pounds. And so we had very limited supplies that we could use, that we had a budget. And we could purchase dowel rods, and we could purchase rubber balloons, and we could purchase other material to construct with, but you were limited by how much you could spend. So there were rich materials and there was a variety, but the way they sort of limited us was by how much you could spend to go buy those materials. So I think that's just kind of to your point of, we don't need a little bit of everything for everyone, but let me choose the few materials I need and let me go deep with those materials I chose. I think it's a kind of a different way of putting a constraint on it that achieves a similar goal.
And going back to something that Peter mentioned at the beginning too, that I think is really important, is that we're talking about this really, I think it's a really subtle art, developing these kind of open-ended provocations, and there's a lot to it. I mean, we we could write books about it, probably all of us, and then even more books together. But how do we describe this in such a way that somebody who's never really thought about what is a kit in terms of it, how is it, where is it on a spectrum between totally closed-ended, for example, like the plastic car kits that you might get at a toy store that you glue together and you just get that car, versus a kit like Makey Makey, which is, got a lot of possibilities, which you're invited to kind of co-create. We're still kind of calling them all kits, I notice in this conversation, even though we are definitely applying different kinds of meanings to that, mostly kind of over on the open-ended side. So I'm just wondering if anybody has thoughts about, if we want to communicate this really to a general audience, and the word kit is already, I think, pretty well defined as something probably mostly closed-ended. What can we use? Do we coin a new term? Do we, how do we unpack this for people who maybe aren't educators and don't necessarily think a lot about this, but in a way that it becomes an identifiable kind of approach? And the reason I want to do that is because I want to advocate for that kind of approach, because I think it's valuable for kids and it's missing from their lives right now. I'm just wondering if anybody has thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And one of the things that I always get hinky about is when people say, oh, this word that we were using doesn't work anymore, let's pick a new one instead. Because I'm a nerd about language and I always want to fight for the words to mean the things I want them to mean. So at the library, what we play with is the word that comes with kit. So we call our kits Explore kits. We do that for two reasons. One, the word Explore is searchable in our catalog and it's tagged and you can find all of the stuff. But the idea of the kits at the library is they're for you to explore. So we always make sure our kits have two things, the stuff in the kit, but also a set of stuff that comes with the kit that's either instruction cards or example cards or a book that might make sense. So Colleen and I were talking about, glomming some of the stuff from some of her collections and making that an Explore kit. And the idea is that you can ignore the book or not, but it's there if you need it. But the whole point of the kit is not to make a car. That wouldn't make a good Explore kit for library checkout because we can only circulate it once, right? And then I get in trouble at the end of the year. But it's a kit that has, we think a lot about reducing the friction for a family to like have an experience together, right? So we've got 12 LEDs in there and we've got enough of the wire for it to go and whatever. But the idea is that it's an opportunity for you to explore. And it's still a kit because it is a kit that we're gonna make it do the thing. And people, that's not a scary word. It's not a new word. They don't have to learn a word, but Explore invites them in a way. So my bias is let's not make new words. Let's love the ones we have and make sure they mean what we want them to mean.
Or is there a way to, like, you can add more things to the kit? I think that's a big thing that we've been talking about a lot, is that if a kit is meant to be open-ended and allow for more possibilities than what it already contains, we need to make that really explicit, right? And some of the best kits that are out there on the market even are ones that are not limited to just what comes in that box. It invites more to be added to it. So
accessories.
Hey, the box is open, add more to it. That could be part of it too.
Yeah, I actually, when I looked over Jay's dissertation today, I noticed that he had called some things open kits and some things closed kits, but I like the idea of exploring kits better, like, because I'm always talking about exploring materials. So if it's an Explore kit, it gives me something to do and look and find, but maybe I don't have an end goal in mind. So it is sort of that tinkering mindset. But like that is a hard thing to create. Like when Aaron and I wrote the big book of makerspace projects, that was our goal. We want projects people can make that are not like we're done, that we want them to look at the end and go, well, now what can I do? We want to now what? I think that's like really the important thing at the end, is there has to be some now what. We don't want to stop here. We don't want to all make the same paper circuit and just stop. We want to make one collaborative, interactive art piece where we've all made paper circuits and it lights up a beautiful thing. So I like Explore Kit. You win, bud.
Well, thank you. And in danger of talking too much, I do want to say too, sometimes the goal isn't to make a thing that's tangible, right? So one of my favorite Explore kits at the library is a microscope and some old slides. It's like a 30-year-old microscope. It was donated to the library. You guys somebody has in their attic this thing that grandpa tried to get you to use and it never worked. These are for people to look at and try and play with and fiddle with. We've also got a telescope and a constellation kit. These are not earth-shatteringly innovative kits, but they're an opportunity for a family that's never looked up at the sky at night to maybe see a thing, maybe do it together, and to have a memory, which isn't going to show up on a thing later. You can't bring the memory back, but it's a thing that got made that isn't a tangible physical thing. And I think that's important too in some of these open-ended experiences. I have the Ecto 1 Lego kit on my desk at work. I don't care that I've built the Ecto-1. I care that I remember being 6 and probably shouldn't have been watching Ghostbusters, but I was, and I saw it with my dad. And that's a thing that I look at, and it's an experience and a memory that we made, and that I got to relive through the kit, but it doesn't solely exist in the piece of plastic on the wall.
I'm going to have to go, but I wanted to just add one thought related to this. I mean, Michelle is proposing the idea of set. Bud suggested the exploratory kit. It's the nature of what it takes to explore something that interests me most. We talk a lot about a limited palette, and this isn't, it's absolutely right, Colleen. This is a hard thing to do, but figuring out what a palette should look like that's suggestive of multiple possibilities. I mean, that's why this whole thing started for me at CLS, because people were knocking the Arduino because it was too open and kids didn't know how to get started with it. But I feel like what it does represent is a way that can take you into lots of different avenues. So what are the kinds of materials, whether it's craft and art materials or techie materials or biological materials, what is the palette that you're working with that isn't so defined that you've got a single outcome and really does allow for exploration? To me, that's the key to having an exploratory kit or set, whatever you want to call it, that really allows for more possibilities. It's an invitation in that represents multiple possibilities.
And with that, thank you, Karen. I think we are going to have to close because we promised an hour, and I think all of us have to run off. But as you can probably tell, we could talk about this for days. And I think we'll probably continue conversations in a lot of different ways. Thanks everyone for being here. I know we'll post the video, Mark will post it, and I think all of us will probably post and share it as well. But thanks again for joining this bit of the conversation at least.
Yes, thank you,
Thanks,
Mark.
everyone. What a pleasure.
I'll copy the chat as well and put it in a text document for everyone, maybe in the Google Doc that we've already shared. So if you guys want to revert back to that or post it in your own places, and then it's posted on Facebook right now, but I'll download that video and post it up to YouTube as well, that send you guys the links. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.
It was a lot of fun.
I'm going to copy the link. It's a long chat to copy.
Hey.
Hey, Bud, now we need to go to High Hops Brewery or something.
I agree.
Seriously.
Yeah, let's figure it out. Let's email. Let's figure it out.
You guys.
Absolutely.
I'm glad I introduced you.
Yeah,
well done.
thanks, Colleen.
Mission
Thanks, everybody,
accomplished.
for coming.
Bye.
Thanks.
I'm going to close it out.
Oh, I can't get out.
Colleen,
stuck in
you're
the
the best. You're the best.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye. Oh, somebody's got some things. Hey, Jeff, Facebook chat is facebook.com/yearinthemaking. And I'll put that there. And I'll drop this all in as well, the chat. And I'll be posting it to the Design Case, which is my company. Design Case 365 is the YouTube channel. And I will send that out there too. I'll put that on the Facebook page so people can get to it. All right, thank you much.